This is Michael Savage on the Friday afternoon edition of The Savage Nation. Today I'm going to talk with you about the Stalinist regime that is waiting in the wings to destroy America and imprison the population. Now, you may say that's a little histrionic and it can't happen here. And I would say, oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? You sure of that? Are you sure of that? So the other day, the invisible hologram called Kamala Harris, Chameleon Harris, comes out and she starts to screech about food prices being too high and that she's going to rein in food prices by attacking the greedy supermarket chains. And I said, wait a minute, I've heard this before. This is a policy right out of 1930 USSR under Stalin. And it begins by demonizing people. This is what Kamala Harris is doing. She's demonizing people who own food markets, food chains, just like Stalin did. The demonization is the beginning. The end is the imprisonment and or execution of people they don't like. You say it can't happen here, then you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Those who do not know their history are condemned to repeat it. And if you're a dummy, you don't know history, would you please relieve me of you and get away from me? Go away. Go back to grade school. Go smoke a doobie somewhere because you don't know what the hell you're thinking even, idiot. So a policy like this is coming from the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren communist wing of the Democrat Party. A very activist part of the Democrat Party is now completely communistic. So let me tell you the little story about Chameleon Harris demonizing those who own grocery chains. You know what the profit margin is in the supermarket? About 1.5%. 1.5%. It's the slimmest of margins in the supermarkets. I go in a supermarket, I'm astounded at the selection that I see. And I'm reminded of what could happen in a nation if it's run by morons and psychopathic communists like Harris Waltz, where people were fighting over one salami in a butcher store. So let me take you back in time. 1930, Joseph Stalin, the dictator, is ruling, but he's not able to control this entire huge nation called the USSR. He thinks he's surrounded by enemies. Okay, he thinks he's being hunted down by secret police. He's a total paranoid lunatic, but nothing can get in the way of his utopia. Does that sound familiar to you? The utopia of Harris Waltz? They want to transform Russia into a gigantic farm populated by peasants who are now working for the government. And it's called a 5-year plan. But what happens is the Russians are a noble, strong people, as then the Ukrainians were. They never forget Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. And of course, most of the wheat and other grains were produced in Ukraine. And we're going to talk about this another time here, why food prices are so high. It's the war in Ukraine, incidentally. Have you seen many exports of grain coming out of Ukraine? No, you haven't seen much of that. So Stalin is immediately stopped by the peasants themselves. They won't give up their land. They reject collectivization. You know what collectivization is? That's Harris Waltz. They want collectivization. So what is Stalin and his intellectual degenerates? What do they do next? They slander the farmers by calling them kulak, which means profiteer or exploiter, just as Bernie Sanders and the squad have labeled you, the middle class, profiteers or exploiters of the poor, of the immigrant, of the criminal, of the queer. And he then defines the term of what a kulak is. Any farmer who uses hired labor, anyone who owns a mill, a creamery, a potato dryer, mechanical agricultural equipment with a motor or livestock. So the definition is so broad and so vague that there are now false accusations against people, and they're score settling throughout Russia. People are murdered, raped, and people are then attacked by the police who attempt to hide their grain reserves. The resistance of the Soviet peasants is so great that the communist state mobilizes 27,000 dekulakizers, These are communist city dwellers, mainly militants from Moscow and other main cities, who are shipped in from the cities. Let's imagine BLM or Antifa being hired by Harris Waltz to go into the farms. And they go out there and they start to beat people up and steal their grain and send it back to Moscow so the elites can eat while the peasants starve. What happens next? Are you ready for what happens next? Stalin's police send back a report to Moscow. We remove the peasants' winter clothes and warm undergarments. We take their shoes. We even go so far as to confiscate the pillows under their children's heads and all the religious icons, to burn them all. If you think it can't happen here, you're a bigger idiot than your mother thought you were. Now, there were famines in Russia in 1918 and 1921 the 1918 famine followed the Bolshevik Revolution. Another famine occurred in 1921. But the famine organized by Stalin from the early 1930s that I'm trying to tell you about right now was the most devastating of all, especially in Ukraine. 5 million human beings are starved to death in Ukraine mainly. And we are told, we call the famine Holodomor. Holodomor in Ukrainian means extermination by starvation. Everything was taken from the Ukrainian farmers, down to the very last crumb. A mother was known to have killed her own child with an axe to cook the child and feed him to others, and no one asked any questions. Now, you say that's a little extreme and it can't happen here? Even oaks begin with acorns. It can happen here. So when you hear Harris demonizing those who own supermarket chains, you are hearing history repeat itself again. And if you want to read more about it, why do you think this book was called Inside the Plot to Destroy America? I didn't think it would be Harris, but I knew it would be the Democrat Party USA, which is a direct copy of the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA. And in this book, I say the Civil War is here in chapter 1, and I write about the new kulaks. And who are the new kulaks? You are. Anyone who doesn't vote for Kamala Harris is now a kulak to Waltz and to Harris. I'll tell you again. I'll read it to you. It's a little different, the same story. In Soviet Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, I wrote, started with a hatred towards farmers, just like Harris is starting the demonization. But what we're seeing here in America today is a hatred against white people, a race stirred by Biden-Harris themselves. And this was an insurgency of sustained and distributed conflict with violence being carried out by the left. And so if I were to define to you what an insurgency is, you will see that the conflict that we are living through in America today under Harris, Biden-Harris, is very similar to the Bolshevik Revolution. But this has happened in other places in the world as well. Many civil wars in the world did not and do not have soldiers marching on the battlefield. Did you know that in the early stage of the Syrian civil war, it was fought by paramilitary groups fighting in neighborhoods? It was the same for 30 years in Ireland. Did you know that? Groups of insurgents policed the streets. They disappeared people from their homes. They kidnapped and removed them. They assassinated political enemies and bombed buildings, very much like Chicago, New York City, and other gang-run cities in America today. This is exactly what we are seeing today. This is the conflict we are seeing today. And I thought I would bring to you today a little history about Kamala Harris's very, very dangerous rhetoric of demonizing. Now it's the grocers. Tomorrow it will be the gasoline stations. And you will have gas lines. You'll have food lines. You'll be fighting over a loaf of bread. If this psychotic maniac and the outright naked communists that she selected win this election, which could happen. It could happen very easily, and it could happen here. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a podcast, whether it was on YouTube or somewhere else, I don't know. I advised President Trump, to stop demonizing Kamala by calling her names, not saying she's not black enough or whatever. Stick to policies. And he was doing well yesterday with the pictures of the products out on the table at Westminster, at the Bedminster. He was doing very well. And then he slipped back to the behavior that we've all come to know from him, which we detest, which is name calling like a schoolyard personality. If he doesn't stop it, these communists are going to win the election as sure as I'm sitting here. My name is Michael Savage. Now, it's not just the left who have tried price controls. I want to remind you of something else. And this is going to be a very short broadcast. I'm almost finished. It's late on a Friday, and I think I should end soon. Did you know that Richard Nixon tried wage and price controls in 1971? And you have pundits now saying that's a good idea. Let's use price controls to fight inflation. Nixon tried it in 1971. It was a disaster in America, and he lifted the wage and price controls he had implemented in 1970. In 1973, he lifted the wage and price controls that he had implemented 2 years earlier in 1971. But those of you who do not know history don't know that such wage and price controls, which always seem reasonable and sensible, leads to rising prices. It doesn't work. By treating inflation through wage and price controls, you don't cure the illness called inflation. Economic literature is filled with examples showing how attempts to cool inflation with price controls caused economic calamity, whether it be the ancient Roman Republic, which tried it, to modern-day Venezuela. It results in the same disastrous ending. It doesn't work. So if you think that the demon rats know anything about history, you may be right. I think they do know history. I think that some of them know exactly what they're doing. And I think they would like to see our farms turned into collectives. I think they would like to see farmers arrested and thrown into prison who resist them and refuse to turn their products over to the federal government. But I don't think you'll be limited to farmers. Do you? That's who she is, and that's who Waltz is. Now, I did a podcast the other day. Is Waltz, I forget the exact title I used. It's a very good title about him. There's no question in my mind he's a plant of the CCP. He had 30 trips to China. He and his wife married on the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre of protesters in China. Who would get married to celebrate the death of Chinese people who protested the communist government other than a fellow traveler like Waltz? Waltz is absolutely the Manchurian candidate, 100%. And if those two win, we'll be one breath away from a total loss of the United States of America. And that's all I have to say today. There's nothing more I can add to it. I can keep going. I know many of you would like me to keep going. I can summarize it again for you. It begins with demonization of farmers, like Stalin called them kulaks, just like comedian Harris is calling farmers, or now not farmers, she's calling grocery store owners or chain store owners profiteers, and she wants to control them, just the way Stalin tried to control the farmers in the Soviet Union. Anyone who fled communist countries knows what I'm talking about. Unfortunately for all of us living in this country, a large segment of our population are absolute and total idiots. The under 30 generation is about the stupidest generation in American history. Absolutely drugged and ignorant. Impulses are all that matter. All that matters to them is losing weight, abs, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And if you think that they give a rat's behind about my lecture to them about what can happen here if they elect these two communists, you are mistaken. If you like what you're hearing, you know what trouble we're in. And I appreciate it if you just hit the like button and subscribe. So the next time I decide to speak with you, which perhaps will be on Sunday morning, God willing, for my God talk, that's the next time you will hear from me. Until we meet again, my friends, thank you very much for being a loyal follower of the Savage Nation. Thank you so